feel like the last couple of years you've like purposely picked this fight with the red states. I mean, the DeSantis. Yeah, but I don't want to live in the Civil War country.
I agree with that.
You know what? Well, but you seem like you.
California have the highest cost of living in the country. The governor had no answer. But the answer is obvious.
Bill Maher did not criticize Gavin Newsom. He gutted him. He took the polished, camera-ready image that Newsom has spent years constructing and tore it apart piece by piece in front of millions. Newsom has built an entire political identity around the idea that California is a progressive paradise. Maher just proved that identity is built on sand, and once the first crack appeared, the whole thing came crashing down fast. Buckle up, because what this video is about to expose has not been covered like this anywhere on social media.
Be good at the job. Not this year, we know. No, I know. But he said, I don't think he could win. I don't think he could win. He's too progressive coming from this state and what he's done in this state to win in any southern state, any red state. I disagreed, but no, this is a progressive African-American owned station, and I'm sure they like you, but he doesn't think you can win. What do you say to
Maher's criticism centers on one brutal observation about Gavin Newsom: the gap between what he presents and what people in California are actually experiencing. And for Maher, that gap is not just noticeable, it is so wide that it becomes insulting the second you actually examine what is happening on the ground. In California, working families face housing costs that have pushed homeownership completely out of reach, grocery bills that keep climbing with no ceiling in sight, gas prices that punish people just for driving to work, and a cost of living that treats the middle class like it does not deserve to exist. Those are not minor inconveniences. Those are pressures that are reshaping how millions of people live, plan, and survive every single day.
Went from the 6th largest economy to the 4th largest economy, $4.1 trillion a year. We have more Fortune 500 companies than we've ever had in the last 2 decades. More scientists, engineers, more Nobel laureates, venture capital, over $106 billion this year. Finest system of higher education in the world. A conveyor belt for talent like no other. We're the dominant ag state, $62.1 billion, forestry, hunting jobs, ag jobs. You talk about farmers and ranchers, you're talking about my home state.
Meanwhile, Newsom continues to stand behind podiums, deliver polished speeches, and frame California as the model that the rest of America should follow. So to Maher, putting that messaging next to the reality people are living through is not leadership, it is performance. And critics say that is exactly why the criticism landed as hard as it did, because the contrast between the image and the truth has become impossible to ignore for anyone actually paying attention.
I do want to, while we're on the economy, ask about affordability. Because yes, people are struggling all across the country. California has the highest cost of living in the nation. The state's prices are 11% higher than the national average. We were actually out to dinner here in Nashville last night. We met a couple from California. They moved out of California because they couldn't afford the rent or even to buy a home and also start a family.
Mr. Speaker, it is undeniably true that many, many Americans continue to struggle with the cost of living in this country. But what is also true is that those struggles are not felt uniformly throughout the country, that prices are much higher in certain places than others. In my own state of California, we have the highest cost of living in the country. And our governor, Gavin Newsom, was asked about this recently on CNN. Why does California have the highest cost of living in the country? The governor had no answer. But the answer is obvious. It is the state's failed policies that have, through this laboratory...
Gavin Newsom says his state is thriving, but the people with the most skin in the game are heading for the exit. New reporting shows that at least half a dozen billionaires have already left the Golden State. Up to 20 more could be packing their bags as a proposed 5% wealth tax remains on the table. The latest, Google co-founder Larry Page is headed to Miami, Florida. But he's not alone. Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison on the move to red states like Texas and Florida.
Many of these people that are leaving are lifelong Democrats, supporters of the very people in the process that now is turning on them. The exodus from California is millionaires, billionaires, but it's also working people who more and more can't find opportunity.
Then the conversation shifts to something much harder to dismiss, and suddenly the whole debate gets deeper than just one state or one governor. Maher points to the businesses that are quietly leaving California, not with dramatic announcements, but with silent relocations, reduced investments, and decisions made behind closed doors that never make headlines. That is not a talking point. That is economic erosion happening in real time. That is real damage to real communities and real jobs. And the people left behind are not the wealthy or the connected. They are the workers, the small business owners, the families who built their lives around the promise that California would take care of them.
Conception about you, and what is the fairest criticism of Gavin Newsom?
Fairest criticism. I don't know about the misconception. I think some of this, some of the Bateman, the looks, the whole thing, right? The hair, all that, And so I think people then see that, believe certain things. It sort of connects.
They believe that you're a lightweight. Is that what you're saying? They think you're just...
They think you're just a little more style.
Yeah.
Versus the substance. And I put the substance in terms of the policy making up against it. I mean that, and that's not...
That contrast lands hard because it drags the conversation back to a reality that no amount of messaging can cover up. Critics argue that this is exactly where Newsom's approach falls apart. Because when you speak as if everything is working while people around you are struggling to keep their heads above water, you are not just being optimistic, you are being dishonest. No one is claiming that governing a state the size of California is easy, but pretending the outcomes match the promises is the kind of distortion that critics say erodes trust faster than any policy failure ever could.
When you're the president, you're representing the whole country, and people are looking at California and saying, well, is it in the best possible state? When we see many millionaires fleeing there, when we see, and he's against these proposed taxes on billionaires, but it's still, like, how do you make people reel in the homeless population? How do you make people understand that you're trying your best? And what have you done? Are you messaging to us, explaining how much you've grown over the last 5 years? 10 years, how much before it's beyond you? He's like blaming back to Reagan times. You have to really justify some of the decisions that you've made under your watch. I hate when President Trump points to Biden now that we're a year in, and that's not even a long runway. I don't like when presidents continue to put the blame on past presidents, and so I'll ask the governors not continue to point the blame about who else made the city good or bad. It's the crown is on your head.
Yeah, he's going to have a difficult time, I think, selling that.
But Maher does not stop at criticizing the results. He widens the argument and goes straight after what he sees as the deeper problem: a leadership style built entirely around optics. This is a fight Maher has been picking with Democratic leaders for years. And once again, he makes his position very clear. In his view, when every decision is filtered through how it will look on camera rather than how it will land in people's lives, governance stops being about solving problems. It becomes about managing perception. And what may have started as smart communication has, in his eyes, slowly become a permanent substitute for actual results.
It's really been interesting, the reaction to the podcast. I mean, we had some controversial figures on, I'll acknowledge that, and Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, and some others. But you're right. I mean, this idea that we can't even have a conversation with the other side.
You have to. They won.
Thank you. That's it, bottom line. And by the way, or the notion we just have to continue to talk to ourselves, or we're in the same damn echo chamber. These guys are crushing us. The Democratic brand is toxic right now. We had a high water mark 2 weeks ago, and that was a CNN poll at 29% favorability. It's dropped in the NBC poll down to 27%.
That is why the concerns coming from inside the Democratic Party itself become part of a much larger argument. Strategists behind closed doors are not worried about Newsom because they dislike him. They are worried because they see a pattern that is becoming a liability far beyond California's borders. A factory worker in Wisconsin does not care about a polished Instagram post. A nurse pulling double shifts in Ohio is not impressed by a well-framed press conference. And a young family in Arizona trying to figure out how to afford childcare is not going to be won over by messaging that sounds good but means nothing when the bills show up at the end of the month.
Or you're not.
Right. Yeah, Californians have often sometimes thought of themselves in this way. They do in a couple of important terms: on technology and innovation, on culture, even to some extent on environmental policy, but less so on things like economic and tax policy, which relates to this, and this will come back to the nation. 2/3 of Californians tell us they think the cost of living there is unmanageable. One thread you're going to see, even in this year's elections in 25, for all states is going to be cost of living, is going to be the economy.
Critics of Maher say that governing requires communication and that strong public messaging is not the same as dishonesty. But Maher's side of the argument is that once the image becomes more important than the outcome, once leaders start believing their own framing more than they believe the complaints of the people they represent, the entire relationship between leadership and public trust starts breaking down. And for him, that is where the damage has already become visible, not just in California, but across the Democratic Party as a whole. Because this is not just about Gavin Newsom anymore. This is about a pattern that critics say has been growing inside the party for years, a tendency to choose the narrative over the numbers, to prioritize the story over the struggle, to treat messaging as a replacement for measurable progress rather than a companion to it. And when that pattern repeats enough times, across enough leaders, in enough states, it stops being an individual problem and starts becoming a structural crisis that no amount of rebranding can fix.
First thing I did was create the Homeless Fraud and Corruption Task Force. California has spent $24 billion in the last 5 years on homelessness, and no one can account for where that money has really gone for. So the first thing I did was set up that task force, and all we did is follow the money. We already charged millions of dollars in fraud. I can tell you more charges are coming, probably as soon as this month. And that's just...
And this is where the political stakes become genuinely dangerous. Kamala Harris is already facing pressure over voter connection. Other Democratic figures are already struggling to hold ground in swing states where elections are actually decided. If Newsom is seen as one more example of the same disconnected leadership, it does not just weaken him individually. It confirms a narrative that critics have been building for years, that this party has lost its ability to hear the people it claims to fight for. And once that perception locks into place in voters' minds, reversing it is not just difficult, it may be impossible.
After the 2026 midterms, you're going to give it serious thought.
Yeah, I'd be lying otherwise. I'd just be lying, and I can't do that.
Governor, you have long said that if you ever run for the White House, you need a compelling why, a reason. Are you moving closer?
Still, Maher draws a line that gives his argument a different weight than most political attacks. He is not calling for Newsom to be removed. He is not saying the Democratic Party should abandon its values. He is saying something much simpler and much more direct, that leaders should be challenged on results, not protected by their image. That voters deserve honesty, not production value, and that the moment politics becomes more about how things look than how things actually are, everyone loses. Not just one party, but the entire system. And that is what makes this more than just another segment on a talk show. This is a mirror being held up at a moment when the reflection is not flattering. And the question now is not whether Maher went too far. The question is whether anyone in a position of power is actually willing to look. Clip 9. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this seriously, because this conversation is not finished. Is Gavin Newsom governing California, or is he just performing the role of someone who governs California? At what point does protecting your image stop being smart politics and start becoming a betrayal of the people who put you in power? And if the Democratic Party keeps choosing presentation over results, who exactly is left to trust? Drop your answers in the comments. I will be reading every single one.